Last night was pretty exciting with the launch of the A7 III, and it sort of made me kind of think about the bigger picture. What is the 10,000-foot view of Sony right now, especially in relationship to the three newest cameras, the A7 III, the A7R III, and the A9. Now, one of the greatest benefits of these three cameras and the overall sort of high 10,000-foot view is they all share the same battery. They all share the same grip, which is really, really good because the battery life is excellent. I wanted to hit that really quick. Sony is saying that the battery life is the best of any mirrorless camera ever, and then it posts this 710 shots for one battery charge. It's always frustrating to hear that. There's a sort of a standard by which all batteries for cameras have to be tested against, and it's skewed towards a DSLR and not for a mirrorless camera, which requires a lot more electronics to work. In actual practice, I've gotten as many as 5,000 shots on one battery charge in a long day of shooting, say at a wedding or a big event. And because of the EVF change, the EVF in the A7 III is not quite as good as the A9 or the A7 III, and that the fact that that's not as good is a benefit to battery life. And so the battery life is going to be better on the A7 III. It's going to be superior to the A9 as well as the A7R III, which is really good news. All three cameras across the board also share the same card slots and the ability to use the UHS-2 fast cards. So the G cards, the Sony G cards will work great in the A7 III, which is really good. I can't stress enough as a professional photographer how important it is to be able to have multiple cameras that have the same exact button layout. And this is a big deal. When you're a photojournalist and you're working on a story, if you're covering a forest fire or if you're covering some kind of a disaster like a hurricane, you can't always change lenses. You don't have time, so you carry multiple bodies, as many as 3 at a time. And this is the case in sports photography as well. And so it's really nice to have, you could have one of each of those cameras. You could have an A7 III, an A7R III, and an A9. And when you grab each one and pull it to your eye, it's going to have all the same button layouts. This is something that used to drive me absolutely crazy in Canon, because they would change even the same model number, like the 5D, the original 5D, the 5D Mark II, the 5D Mark III. They kept changing and moving things around, and it just really messed you up. And it made you want to buy more of the same, which is good for them, but bad for the photographer. So I really appreciate Sony's kind of consistency in the button layout and feel and overall workability of these three bodies now. Let's talk about frames per second. The shutter in the A7 III is the same as the one in the A7R III. So it can shoot 10 frames per second, and it's a very, very short lag time on the mechanical shutter side. Kind of by now, everybody knows that the lag time of the Sony electronic shutter cameras are really, really short, and it's like really great for getting, ball off bat or a ball off the club head in golf, on a driving range or whatever. You can really get that consistently. It's good. And the A7 III shares that same shutter, the mechanical shutter of the A7R III. And so the A7 III is actually superior to the A9 if you're using a flash a lot, if you're a pro and you're using a flash. Also, if you have issues where you're going to be in venues all the time that have banding, like not great lighting, like cheap LEDs, and there's one type of fluorescent light that drives us all crazy with the banding. So on the mechanical shutter side, the A7 III and the A7R III are actually better than the A9. So if you use a ton of flash, you're going to enjoy the A7 III. It's a fantastic camera for using with strobes and things like that. Let's talk then about video. The A7 III is also capable of all the picture profiles, and that includes the S-Log, which is PP7, Picture Profile 7. And so because it has a 24 megapixel sensor, you can shoot in Super 35 mode with the A7 III and retain 4K, which is really a great benefit, because if you're going to do a lot of multi-camera shoots, you could really, you can buy these cameras for $2,000 a piece and get S-Log and get 4K and Super 35 with, cinema primes, whatever you want to do. So It's a really great camera for a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth body. If you're doing big time video projects and you want to have that eye candy of full frame optics and stuff like that. But even if you want to use those cinema primes that are designed for Super 35, you still retain 4K, which is a big deal. It's a very, very nice way to work. So when it comes right down to it, which way do you go? If you're not a Sony user now, I think that this A7 III is going to be the one that kind of breaks the camel's back. It's going to be the toe in the water camera for a lot of people. They're going to dip their toe into Sony for the very first time with the A7 III. Many people have been kind of waiting on the sidelines, watching Sony develop, watching all the glass. There's now 26 different FE mount lenses that they've done in 5 years. So 5 years, they go from 0 to 26 lenses in 5 years. It's amazing. And then today, Sigma announces that they're going to do all their big, nice prime art lenses in FE mount in a couple months. You're going to be able to buy pretty much the really good fast glass in E-mount, which is awesome. So lots of things happening. So toe in the water camera, A7 III, I think a lot of people are going to pull the trigger. The other group of people that I think are really going to be good for the A7 III are people that have been Sony shooters and started with the A6000. Maybe they upgraded to the A6300 or the A6500. Maybe they have a couple of FE lenses that are full frame, and now they're kind of ready to make that move, and they want to go all the way to full frame. This is going to be like a very low impact, cost-wise body to get into for $2,000. That's going to allow you to not only use the great FE lenses for the full frame, but also you're going to be able to use your lenses that you already bought for your A6000 series. And because you have a big sensor, 24 megapixel, you'll just drop down to 10 megapixel and still be able to use that glass. Case in point, I'm shooting an A7 III right now with a 24 1.8 lens, which is designed specifically for APS-C. I'm in 4K, but because it has that big 42 megapixel sensor, it has no issue with giving me 4K great quality from the crop sensor lens. So you can mix and match at will as long as you have that sensor size that the A7 III does have. So it's really cool that way. So I think the A7 III is going to have broad appeal for a lot of clicking moms. I think people who want to go and shoot sports with their kid at 10 frames per second, you can go to like a kid's soccer game and just mop the floor with the place. You're going to be able to rent the lenses, 100 to 400, pretty soon a 400 2.8. So if you have a special thing you want to do, baseball tournament or something like that, that's going to be great. A7 III is going to be a great camera for an entry-level video person who wants to kind of kick the DSLR habit and get where you can actually capture audio on the same card as the video, which is a new concept for people shooting Canon and Nikon. There are so many audio solutions on the Sony side of things that make it really easy. A great example again is I'm using this XLR K2M, which gives me a balanced 48 volt phantom power right off the hot shoe. It'll be the same exact thing with the A7 III. So this is a very powerful camera at a low price point that will give great quality. But what's the downside of the A7 III? What's its pain point? There's a clue in that battery life, the extended battery life. The greatest draw on an electronic shutter camera is the EVF. The back of the camera, the LCD display, draws almost nothing compared to that EVF. The EVF in the A7R III and the A9 is awesome. It's like really good. You can see everything. It's very good for critical focus with manual focus lenses. If you are coming out of Leica M and you have a whole bunch of M glass and you want a camera that will really show you sharp focus without using peaking, where you can just use the viewfinder, the A7 III is probably not for you. Even though it's cheap, you're going to do better with the A7R III probably to do that Leica thing. That's going to be a better option for you. And so A7 III is going to be a perfect camera for clicking moms, for moms and dads that want to shoot sports with their kids, shoot just regular kid pictures, family photos. It's great for going on vacation, especially when paired with the 24 to 105 G lens. It's like the one lens that does it all. It's awesome. I think it's also going to have broad appeal as a third, fourth, fifth body For people that are doing very high-end video, the A7 III is perfect for that, with S-Log and a big sensor and 4K capability in both full frame and Super 35. Why then go to the A7R III? Like, what's the difference there? The A7R III gives you 42 megapixels of real estate, unbelievable quality, no anti-aliasing filter. So if you're going to shoot landscapes at the highest level, if you want to create gigabyte files from shooting multiple frames, if you want to take advantage of the pixel shift technology, these are going to be things that are going to be really drawing you into A7R III. If you're a working pro and you do tons of portrait work with strobes, studio strobes, not speedlights, A7R III is probably going to be a better fit for you, especially if you're going to be selling clients huge, big blow-ups, or you're going to do really high-end, billboard work or large electronic display work. A7R III is really going to be the kind of way step up from the A7 III in terms of file size, but not just that, but file quality. So for the most discerning people, if you're really type A, and if you're not a working pro, but you have the money, the A7R III might be worth the jump up. And finally, who then should buy the A9? The A9, I've got two of them. I love that camera. It's completely changed the way I do sports photography. In many ways, it puts me on vacation, where I don't have to worry about sharp focus and eyes and things like that. So even though all these cameras have great eye AF capability, even with shooting sports, as long as people aren't wearing a helmet, I use eye AF all the time for sporting events like basketball and tennis. It's amazing. It'll even get you, if you're shooting golfers with hats on, if they're not wearing glasses, it can still work there. It's amazing. But the A9 is really reserved for that consummate professional that's shooting sports action all the time. I think the A9 still has a great advantage with fashion photographers people who do tons of runway work, and you don't get any time at all. There's that sharp, fast walk, that flip turn, and they're gone. And the A9 is going to give you so many more frames at 20 frames per second versus the A7 III and the A7R III at 10 frames per second, that it's really going to be that difference. Also, the A9 still has the best autofocus in low light and of action. So, it's so cool though that there's all three cameras that you don't have to choose between. Like the Nikon makes one, and Olympus makes one, and Canon makes one, and Sony makes one. The fact that all three of these cameras are all coming from the same manufacturer, stunning, stunning. So I'm not sure if this will add confusion. I hope not. I hope it will kind of help you discern which way to go. But if you've been out on the sidelines watching everything happen at Sony, the A7 III is kind of the message that they're sending you. And it's saying, it's time to get in. And I would say to you, as an artisan, as a pro that's been Sony now for 4.5 years, come on in. The water's fine. Don't be scared. I'm Patrick Murphy-Racy, a Sony artisan, and I'm hoping this has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching.